I first became obsessed with creative projects when I was around 11 or 12. I would lock myself away in a room and work on things. I wrote bad derivative novels, I drew and I painted. I took up photography and sculpture and model building. I fell in love with making projects. But this has not been an easy romance. Most of the projects I started in my life I have abandoned. I'd make it a little ways in and then I would give up and I'd get discouraged and I'd get bored and I would lose faith in my idea and I'd walk away and then I would feel terrible about myself. It wasn't until I was in college that I realized that everyone else was doing that too. I thought it was a problem unique to myself and thus a source of massive guilt and inadequacy. But, because I'm not the one-of-a-kind little flower I thought myself to be, and this is the way all of us who feel vulnerable see ourselves, I came to learn that common problems have common solutions. And creativity, like everything else, is a skill, and this skill, just like everything else, has to come with a shift in thinking. Now, don't mistake me for thinking this is one of those self-help creativity videos that gives you clever tips on how to be creative. Like carrying a notebook with you, or that weird key trick where you hold a key in your hand and you take a nap and you drop the key on a plate. Just look it up. It's very, very dumb. Instead, this is a better way to think about creativity and ideas. I'm always looking for further improvements to these theories, but this is a much better position than I started in. So let's go through the big problems of thinking I see in the creative process. I've seen them in myself, in my peers, and in my university students for the last decade. Motive. One of my biggest fantasies as a kid was being a novelist. I couldn't think of anything more appealing than writing stories for a living and then seeing it in bookstores. So I do have 30,000 words of a Lord of the Rings ripoff novel on a floppy disk from when I was about 14. But I never stuck with it, and what I was writing was garbage. It was about a stone that grants wishes, and the plot holes that came with that were so enormous that I gave it up. But the problems weren't insurmountable. Maybe they could have been fixed with enough time and effort, but I was young, and my dream wasn't to write, it was to be a writer. So of course I didn't stick with it. If your motive comes from the possibility of future adulation, rather than the enjoyment of the work itself, you will probably not make it very far. When I was in college, everybody had some huge creative endeavor around the corner, but most of them, including my own, didn't really pan out. The biggest reason was this question of motive. And I'm not describing two different types of personalities, one that craves adoration and the other that enjoys creative work. These are both present in all of us, at various levels at various times, but you do have the power to cultivate one over the other. And you should cultivate the enjoyment of process by gritting your teeth and sticking with some projects just to see them through to the end until you learn to love it. Creating things for the dominant reason of getting praise from other people is a bad creative process. It motivates you to finish faster, which motivates cutting corners and skimping on quality, and then it means you get nothing from it unless you gain praise. And getting people to notice or engage with your work is among the greatest challenges of anybody who makes anything. Also, you should just work to get over a craving for admiration. You would be hard-pressed to persuade me that that is a valuable character trait. Belief in a perfect idea. I've spent many an evening staring at a blank canvas trying to decide what to draw. It's not dissimilar from scrolling through Netflix or any of its streaming clones and trying to find the right thing to watch until you've done so for 2 hours and now you don't have time to watch anything. In a world of infinite things to draw, I frequently drew nothing, or started 5 things and then abandoned them all after a few minutes because the idea wasn't as satisfying as I'd hoped. I was searching for inspiration, an idea that feels perfect. I was always mystified as to how more experienced artists than myself managed to churn out so much work while I labored for days to find something that even felt right to draw. I get partway into it, start running into problems, conclude my idea wasn't that good to begin with, and then I would try something else. I have since learned that this is referred to technically as big stupid dumb thinking. Creative work is not finding a perfect idea and then afterwards coasting downhill while breeze ripples through your hair. Creative work is carrying an idea to the top of a mountain, like it's a vicious badger with a grudge against you. And it's a really long walk. And it's high elevation too, so you can't breathe very well either. But the badger can. He trained in high elevation and he's only getting more powerful with every step. and I think I've taken that analogy as far as I'm going to. The point is that creative work is difficult, and running into problems does not indicate that the idea was flawed to begin with. There are no perfect ideas, but there are a lot of good ones. In fact, good ideas are downright common. They're more like pennies than silver dollars, and they are definitely not buffalo nickels. I don't know if buffalo nickels are rare, I just really like buffalo. But we resist the notion that good ideas are common. We have almost a reverence for creativity and talk about it in downright spiritual terms, especially moments of eureka-style inspiration. But these moments are really rare, and they don't even give you a perfect idea. But sitting around waiting for one is a great way to get what's referred to as writer's block, or creative block, or drawing block, however you want to put it. Instead, accept the human limitation that we can't generate a perfect creative idea that removes the struggle from the process. Take a common, good idea and study and learn about all the context around that idea. Work on it, look for its flaws, and find solutions. Along the way, you'll get hit by moments of inspiration, which are much more likely to happen in the middle of the struggle than at the beginning before you've even walked through the door. I knew that a graphic novel would be a multi-year project, and I waited a long time for the perfect idea. Then eventually, I got sick of not doing anything, and I went with an idea that I could shape with a lot of work, and I am really glad I did. It's not about you, and if it is, it's probably not very good. Among comic writers and illustrators and among artists in general, the number one complaint is how difficult it is to attract an audience. And the perception is not wrong. Unless you get a stroke of good fortune, finding an audience is work that rivals the creation of the project itself. But I consistently hear artists wringing their hands over whether they'll be forced to alter their unique voice in order to attract mainstream audiences. And I'll admit, when I hear something like this, I'll usually investigate. I'll look up the portfolio or the comic. And if you're in the market for a method, this is a very effective way to find terrible work. Bad composition, bad color theory, bad construction, bad writing. This is usually defended by people saying that the work is abstract, but even abstract work maintains basic principles of shape and color. It has to, or the experience of looking at it is just unpleasant. Bad writing is not fun to read. It certainly does make you wonder how someone can fall into this pit of terrible or mediocre work and never seem to improve, until you understand the doctrine of voice. Many artists live by this doctrine, frequently without realizing that they've even imbibed it. It comes down to the fundamental notion that a person's unique voice is extremely valuable. The voice emanates from their true self deep within them, which I suppose is some kind of internal overlord that must be obeyed. As you can imagine, if you think that your inherent voice is extremely valuable, things like practice, study, and being influenced by those better than you is actually a corruption of the unique voice. If you want your voice to be as pure as possible, you should really stay as bad at art as you were born, and you'd be amazed how many people accomplish this. This creates other consequences too. For one, if anyone criticizes your work, they are criticizing your one true self, which is kind of bad. For another, if anyone doesn't pay attention to your work, they have essentially declared your voice to be worthless. For even yet another, if anyone does like your work and even compliments it, but interprets it differently than you intended, which is extremely common if you've ever shown your work to anyone, then they didn't really understand your voice and now their opinion would logically have to be suspect. As you can imagine, those who commit to this philosophy are generally pretty miserable. But I've come to realize that this is an extremely modern way of thinking about art, and we have an entire human history that we can look back on for alternatives. Back in a time where people seemed a lot less miserable, despite not having indoor plumbing, which is impressive. Rather than using art strictly as an exploration of yourself as the most interesting thing in the world, it turns out there's a lot of fascinating people, things, and ideas floating around out there that are interesting whether or not you ever existed. They were fantastic before you were born, and fantastic after you have died, and every human being has forgotten that you ever lived. That's your reminder of mortality for the day. So what if art was a means to explore interesting ideas, whether or not they have anything to do with you? What if history, mythology, philosophy, literature, and religion were so packed with meaning and insight that you could draw from them to make new things, and by doing so, understand reality a little better? I've always been a little disturbed by people whose focus is on self-expression. They seem to lack curiosity about the world. And I've come to believe that a curiosity about the world is a root not only of great creative work, but of great satisfaction in life. It certainly seems more enjoyable than racking your brain to try and understand your true self, as though there's an immutable version of you that exists deep within you that you are beholden to, like the nougat in a chocolate bar, except the nougat is domineering. Once I burned a bunch of shelving and accidentally placed it on top of a rock in the fire pit. I didn't realize that the heat encasing the rock would reach an explosive point, and it exploded. Time slowed down as I watched tiny meteors fly off in every direction. They hurtled through the air, never stopping, incessantly changing, until they hit the ground and snuffed out. That's you, and me, and all of us. Making things is just enjoying the view along the way. Just absolutely annihilate that subscribe button. Hit that little bell, just beat it to death. If you want to read my webcomic, it's free to read, and you can do that at theseuscomic.com. There's a link in the description, as well as a link to buy the first volume as a hardcover graphic novel. Do that. Give me some money. I'd like some money. See you next time.